I'm from Barcelona. I'm Cristina. As she said, I'm designer and Drupal front-end developer. You can find me on Twitter as Chumillas or Cristina everywhere else, because I didn't find Cristina on Twitter. I work at Imbra, an agency or Drupal shop based in Barcelona. And as she was saying, I'm going to talk about responsive images and how to control them, to know how they work and how to control them at the end with Drupal. So I'm going to start just explaining a little bit about the basics of responsive images, why they are there. I'm going to introduce a little bit of stuff about performance. And then I'm going to talk about scaled versus art direction images, responsive images, because they're not the same. And finally, I'm going to explain how to do all this stuff in Drupal and what Drupal can give to us. So let's start with the basics. This last year, the average of most of the websites was 3 megabytes, and that's a lot. So we have to take that into account when we build our websites, because that's a lot. As you can see, it's been increasing a lot over the last years. So from these 3 megabytes, around the 61% are just images. So imagine doing anything into our website can do, what the impact that it can have on the speed of our website or anything else. So some other facts that we know about images is that they load asynchronously. They start loading as at the time that the parser that finds the image then starts loading it. And another fact that we know, and it has been like that for years, is that we usually give to the final user a bigger image than he or she needs. So those are the main facts about images right now on the web. So the main goal, the main picture that we need to have is that we want to deliver the highest quality image supported by the browser, but we don't want to send them anything else. That's all. That's the main goal that we need to take into account. So some other basic stuff, we have several image formats. I know that it's probably super basic for you, but I've seen 2,000 pixels image with PNG with a lot of colors in a hero image. And it's like, what are you doing? So it's basic information, but we need to know that for sure. So we are sure that we are all on the same page. So JPEG are for images for photos. PNG are for images with plain colors. SVGs are for logos or this kind of images where they can be translated to vectors, and we also can use them in super huge dimensions. Then we have the GIF, that it's great for images that needs to move, but don't use it otherwise. And then we have the new web app specification format. The good thing that it gives to us is that we can use as it goes a JPEG, but it's around, in average, it's 20% less of the kilobytes that you're going to use, and you also can use transparencies there, so an alpha channel. And then we have JPEG 2 or 2000 that it doesn't have a good support over the web. So if we want to use the web, this is the average support that we have. Chrome has a huge amount of people using it, so in average it's a lot, but we can always use responsive images, as you will see, with several formats. So we can have a background image, backward compatibility image to use. So we can use WebP and then JPEG as a fallback. So let's start with the basics for responsive images. It started some years ago with the Responsive Images community group. They came up with several paths to follow, and they have been working on that over time, and some specifications have been changing. But the main concepts that we need to have in mind is that we have two things to take into account. One is the information that the author has, and the other is the browser, the information that the browser has. And that's the main important thing. You can have, on this URL, you can see a super long post about it, and it's super well explained. But just to take a fast look to it, as the author, there are four variables that you have to take into account. The first one will be the viewport dimensions. If you are the author, the person that is writing the code or is configuring the website, you won't know if the final user is using a big or a small display, but the browser actually has this information. If you want to think about the image size relative to the viewport, to the final display, the author knows this information because it's the design, and the author actually knows it. And the browser is not going to know it, or at least it didn't know some years ago, but thanks to the new specification that they came up with, that is an attribute for responsive images, that it's called sizes. We give to the browser this information about the design and the spec that it should have. And then we have the screen density. It's the same problem with the view dimensions, that the browser knows it, but the author don't know what is going to happen when it is being loaded. And then we have the source files dimensions, because we don't know, so the browser knows the name of the image that is going to be loaded, but it doesn't know if it is 300 pixels or 3000. So before doing the request, there wasn't a way some years ago to say to the browser, hey, this is a big image or this is a small image. But now with the new specification, the SRC, I always have troubles to say that, the browser knows before requesting an image which of them is the best suited for their situation. So jumping into responsive images, we will say that the first option that we have, because we have two of them, will be the scaled image. This is the anatomy of any scaled image. We have several attributes to the image. For example, we have the width on pixels that we were saying. We can say to the browser before the browser starts downloading the image, which are the pixels. It's the W, that it's the same it's the translation for pixels to the browser. So before the browser starts getting an image, he knows which of them which are the dimensions for each of them. And then we have the sizes. The sizes is just translating the media queries to the browser, with the difference it's not mobile first, it's mobile last, but anyway. This is the way where which you say to the browser, hey, we need an image that uses the 100% of the viewport dimensions, is the VW on mobile, for example, and then from 36 AMs, it's like media queries, so you can use pixels, AMs, and REMs. It has to occupy to use the 33% of the space. So you are giving all this information to the browser, and the browser is going to decide which of the superior images is going to take. And the most important thing here is this. We are not using the picture tag. We are using the IMG tag. So we will say that we are scaling images, just giving the browser which image we have to pick. So we have several images. But then we have art direction, where, as you can see, we have a completely different image here. I mean, it's the same image, but one is horizontal and the other is vertical. So we say that it's not the same image because it's completely different in proportions. So we call to that art direction. This is mainly done by the picture tag specification, where we have the picture here that by itself it doesn't do much. So the important thing is what you do inside the picture module, the picture tag. And those are the sources. Each source should target a different visualization of the image, because as you can see, here we have a different proportion image, so you shouldn't use exactly the same source for that. So inside each source, we have almost exactly the same attributes that we had for the EMG tag. You have the src set, where you give to it the images that you can, that the browser can choose. And also you can say to it if it's density 1 or density or double density or something like that. Then you have the media attribute. The media attribute is to say for each source at which dimension it has to be applied, at which width of the display it has to be used. And then we have sizes that is exactly the same that we have for the EMG tag. So that's mainly the whole attributes that you need to take into account when you are building a responsive images. And then we have Internet Explorer still nowadays, so we need to have these fallback images for Internet Explorer and other browsers like Opera Mini and so on. So the support for the picture tag is all over the web except Internet Explorer. And we always have to remember it, I guess, until 2 or 3 years from now. So this thing has to come here, so we have a picture field that can help us just translating the picture tag into the old styles, browsers, and so on. That's a good polyfill that it's being built by default in a lot of CMSs. So what will be the process for preparing responsive images? The first one will be the basic one, and it's something that you have to prepare together with all the designs and all the front-end decisions, because you need to know how many breakpoints you're going to have and which of them your images are going to respond to, because sometimes you have, I don't know, 10 breakpoints and you want the hero image only to respond to 3 of them. So you have to plan all these breakpoints that we are going to use. Then you have to actually create the files that you're going to use for each image. Then you have to create the responsive image and style or start working or apply everything to it and make it happen. So if we convert, as I was saying, the CSS to the sizes, for example, we will see that in CSS it will be, if we do mobile first, it will be like, let's say, on mobiles we want 100% width, on tablets we want 500% width, and in desktops is 33%. We will start from as I was saying, it's not mobile first, it's mobile last, so it will be the mobile one. Then we will add the one for the tablet that will be a 50 VW, that it's viewport width. It's relative to viewport dimensions, it's not to the container, it's for the viewport. And we have we will start from here with the bigger one, with the desktop or big tablet or whatever you want to call it. The next one will be once you have decided, for example, it's 100%, 50, and 33%. We will jump into find the maximum width that we need on each breakpoint. So, for example, if we have this breakpoint that starts at 830, we will need the bigger size for the previous one. So for each one, we want to know the bigger one. So we will say 829%. And we will, from the design, we will take from there all the, for example, in this case, is super easy. You just have to take from here the margins and the gutter. And it gives you these dimensions that you have 2 columns, and you just know that it's this dimension. So you know which is the maximum width that you're going to need for each breakpoint. And from there, you plan all the image styles that you're going to need. Even if you have to make them one per one, or you have to automate it, you're going to need to plan them. So some years ago, when I started doing that, I just created a bunch of them, and more or less. Until I discovered this session from Mark Drummond. He worked at Lullabot, and he gave this session, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago in New Orleans DrupalCon, and it was like, wow, that's a really smart thing to do. So what was he explaining? He was saying that if you spend a lot of time just creating a lot of images because you just want to give to them the best image, you may spend too much time creating image styles or images for the final user. If you just create a bunch of them and you don't take care about all the widths and all the situations, then you are giving a bigger image than the user is going to need. So he kind of find the middle situation from each one, and he said that you should create an image for every 20% with an increase of 20% from each one. And for example, let's say for the mobile, the smaller image that you're going to need is going to be 240. And from there, you start creating the next one. And you use the rule, and you create like a matrix for all the image styles that you're going to need, because if it's the 50% in the middle and the 33% for the desktop, you just cross the ones that are super similar, and you end up with much less images to work or to prepare with. So that's a really important thing to do, to plan all your image styles or your image that you're going to use, because it's going to save you a lot of work. Another thing that you have to take into account is the naming that you're going to use for your images. There are mainly 2 standard namings that people uses, but you know everyone can use whatever they want. But the normal ones are just using images, using sizes, because, for example, you're going to have a lot of image styles there, and a lot of images that are going to use several breakpoints, and you have, I don't know, different designs, and you are going to reuse a lot of this stuff, so you just use, for example, the sizes for each image. And another situation is using components. When you are building your web, you probably are doing that by components, and each component has a naming related to it. So using that, you know which component is related to the image you are working on. So the main plan that we were saying is having the breakpoints or the media queries. Then we will say that we have to create image files, Then we have to decide if it's an image or the EMG tag or the picture tag. We have to know if it's a art direction image or just a scaled image. And finally, we have to apply the responsive image itself. So how do we do that in Drupal? Because the main thing here is that we don't want to do all the work step by step by ourselves. So ideally someone or something that, some kind of tool that automates that for us, that's the good thing to work with. And Drupal is the node that I know. And in Drupal we have the responsive image module. It was called picture before, but it's now called responsive image. It's super clear to discover which one is it. It's not enabled by default in Drupal, but you just have to enable it. It depends on the breakpoint module, and it depends from several other modules from Drupal. So if we have in mind the progress that I was saying, first, you have to create or import the breakpoints, the media queries. So in Drupal, it became something like that. You can both create breakpoints on themes or breakpoints on modules. And for each module, you have to create, or the theme, you have to create a YAML file. And inside this YAML file, you map all the breakpoints for it. Here you, for example, have the mobile one that it doesn't have any breakpoint at all because it always applies. Then you have the next one that is from 500 and 800 and so on, and you have the last one. So you have to map all this stuff and give this information to Drupal. So if we go to the scaled image, what we have is the MG tag. That will be the way of doing so. For example, let's say that we want to create a teaser one. We just pick the responsive image and option, and then here inside the sizes, we just say to it which are the breakpoints that we want to use and how it has to behave for each one. That will be the scaled image, and then under it, we just have to pick all the image styles that we've chosen. The image for Internet Explorer. And on the teaser, I don't work that fast. And finally, for the teaser, in this situation, we will choose the responsive image that we will want to use. And Drupal takes care of all the other things. So, for example, in this situation, it should start. Yeah, it has started. So Drupal actually, by default, by itself, it will create all the images. So as you can see, it's almost the same image, but the responsive styles are changing. And Drupal is the one that auto-generates all the information for each image. And you see the EMG tag. And for each one, Drupal creates all the image styles and so on. So you don't have actually to take care about that. Then we go to art direction. And this is kind of the tricky one. But for Drupal, you have had to given to it the map of all the breakpoints. So ideally, you just pick the breakpoint groups that you have given to Drupal here, and it's mainly the same. You just map all the images that you have in your Drupal, or your image styles that you have in Drupal. You just choose them and gives all the information, and that's all that you have to do once you have the map done for the breakpoints. And then that's cool that you can actually have by default all this information in Drupal because it's done. You don't have to take care about that. But we're talking about CMSs, we are talking about people that want control over their work, and sometimes you want to give the final person that doesn't have technical skills a little bit of control over the content that they are creating. And here is where the Drupal, in this case, and other CMSs can offer, is the options to have better experiences with controlling their content. So in Drupal we have for giving a solution for that, we have this suite of modules. It's called Crop API. This is the base module for all of them. And we have the image widget crop is a module that gives you, I will say, almost full control over your images. So let's say, for example, that you have a banner or a hero image, and you have a super huge image, and you have some text over the image. So the final user, the editor, the content author, probably is going to need some control over it. So with this solution, you can actually give the final user, for each breakpoint, for each source of the image style, you can they can pick exactly the resolution that they want. So for the user, what it will become will be something like that, where you have the default form here for Drupal, where you will place some content, and then for the image, you pick a random image in this case, and you give all the information that it needs, and then you have this field set under it, where you can actually choose which part of the image is the most important one, and make it bigger or make it smaller depending on what you want. And it's not only for one breakpoint, it's for different breakpoints. So let's say you have this one in this situation, you have the option to not limit the crop of the image, but you can actually decide for each breakpoint which will be the behavior of the image itself. So the user can have all this freedom, and they can actually build a banner or a hero image or something like that. So that will be the bigger thing, or the most complex. So it gives full control to the final user, but it requires a really, really long implementation. You can spend some hours just preparing it. So unless you it really gives a value for the final user, don't go this path. Instead of that, there's this module in Drupal that it's called Focal Point. It's been there for years, and it's super simple, and it's as simple as just giving the user a way of picking the most important part of the image, and that's all. And that's all that the user can have to do. That's the only interaction that the user needs to do. But sometimes sometimes you have the face on the right or the face on the left, and if you automate the crop of the images, you can have a problem, and you can cut someone's faces, and you don't want the president's face just cropped in the middle, so you know. So the way it works is the process is you just create an image style on Drupal. You just say which is the action that you have to do for each image style. Then you have created, for example, 3 image styles. Then you go and add content, and then you and in the form you just have to pick the image that you want and give the user the option to choose it. You can preview all the image. Well, the user can preview how is it going to look like in their final website, and that's all. That's all that you have to do for Drupal, for focal point. So the final user is going to have a lot of control over the image, and it's going to be super easy, and it's going to be responsive. So it gives you basic art direction, and it's great, especially for the final user, because he has the sense of having control. And it requires basic low effort over the default responsive image solution that Drupal ships with. So it's a really, really good solution to work with. And finally, we talk about performance. This will be more or less the big picture of how the browser behaves. So it could be there will be the first ping, then the HTML is being downloaded, and then the browser kind of prioritize the assets that it is going to download, and always CSS and JavaScript, or at least the JavaScript that is going to block the rendering, are downloaded and parsed before. And what happens is that the CSS is already downloaded. The browser starts rendering it or parsing it, and the browser starts downloading the images. What happens that if you don't give enough information to the browser about, let's say, for example, the dimensions of the image, the browser probably is going to just leave a really thin space for the image, and then when the image is there, it's going to move everything. So it's important to always give as much information as we can to the browser, so the browser can kind of predict the place where things are going to be. Another thing to take into account is for performance is the perceived performance, not the performance itself. We could say that inside the perceived performance, something that is less than 1 second is perceived as instant or immediate. So something below 5 seconds, it's something that the user is kind of okay. It's a flow of working with images, working with the web. So they kind of have a little bit of tolerance to that. Here's a little bit more of information about it. But then you have these 10 seconds as a limit, a huge limit. And over 10 seconds, you just lost the user, or you just get the user upset, which is almost the same. So ideally, we should kind of take that into account when we are working with images on the web, because we have several options. We have the synchronous image loading. It means that it's going to start to load the image only what is needed. So unless you have the image inside the scroll sections, I don't know how to say that in English. So the section, the part of the image that you're looking at the moment, the image don't start downloading. And another option is the progressive image loading. And it means that you start downloading a thin image, for example, and when you have more images there, you finally replace the thin image with a new one. That's an example for the progressive loading. You just start with an image, a thin image that is, in this case, is a little bit blurred. And that's the comparison. And that is really good when you're working with images, because if you remember, we said they are around the 60% of the web traffic or the web size. So if we can do this kind of things, it's great, because you're not downloading everything and you are giving the user the feeling that not everything is so slow. And as a conclusion, I would say that always plan your responsive images before implementing it. Don't jump into it without thinking, because you're going to lose time or you are going to lose optimization on the way. So always plan the things. Also, automate as much as you can. If you are working with the CMS, try to use the tools that it gives to you. And the last one, if you are using Drupal, use focal point, because by default, it's the best solution that you can have. And that's all. Maybe it was fast.
Perfect in time. Is Amy here? No. Is Amy here? For the questions.
Yeah, I think I went too fast.
Oh, that's good. Why? You can never go too fast. Switch it on. Yeah, works. Okay, we have some questions from the audience, but I'm not a full-fledged front-ender, so I have no idea what these questions are about, so I'll ask them to you, and then hopefully together we can figure out what they were about. And it's even very small print. Okay, here we go. First one. Why do we even use the picture element when the image element is superior? Do you know what the question means?
The EMG is
the EMG. It's superior.
Well, it's
according
not
to
superior.
Thomas.
I mean, there are different tags. I mean, the EMG has more browser support, but the picture tag is the one that is coming, and it lets you, for example, with a picture tag, into each source, you can, for example, say, for the mobile, I'm going to use the SVG, and for the desktop, I'm going to use EMG, a JPEG or something like that. So the final goal is completely different. The EMG is for one image, just scaled, and the picture tag is actually for having different images. Even if they look the same, you could actually use completely separate files, because it's prepared for that. It's for the same image or conceptual image for the browser, but for example, you can use a logo that is a PNG or something, or a GIF in desktop, and an SVG on the mobile. So the goal behind it is different. Okay.
Next one. Is there a Drupal module that will automatically generate WebP images?
I think I saw something, but I haven't used it. I haven't used it because most of the clients that we work with, they still give support to Internet Explorer 9. So yeah, sadly, yeah. So I think there's something there, but I haven't worked with it. So I'm not sure if it's ready to use.
Okay. So we should look in Google and search. Sorry. All right. Should be doable, I think. Next one, there are many options for tailoring the images to the device, but there are no options yet for tailoring the images to the bandwidth, to the available bandwidth. What can we do? Tell us.
That's good question. I read an article some time ago that actually had the same question that I don't have the answer. The thing is that there are several specifications that are trying to come up with several groups, not only the responsive images group. And the main problem there is that you don't always have this information at the end. So this is more for hard engineers and these people that actually knows how the net works.
All right. When we generate the images, what can we do about images on mobile retina screens? Do I pronounce it correctly? Retina, sorry.
So I haven't demoed it, but for Drupal, so let me find. So here, for example, we have on the SRC set, we have 2 images here, and we will say the first one will be for the default 72 dpm retina, and the second one will be for the double one. So we actually give this information to the browser with the SRC set that is also used both by picture and by the EMG tag. And this is where we say to the browser, use this picture depending on the density you are being displayed. So the browser decides, and you just give to it this information there. Yeah, I don't know if it answers. Cool.
Great. Hey, do we also have higher contrast settings for smaller images, because they are served to smaller devices, and those devices are normally used more outdoors? So more contrast.
Wow.
Does it exist?
That's a really good question, and I don't know. I would guess that it's also behind these new specifications that people is coming with, and it's also something that is not only related to web, it's probably also related to some kind of API for the device, I don't know.
Okay.
But it's something super hard to say, I don't know, sorry.
All right. Yeah, we have tons of questions, lots of nice ones, and we have a little bit of time left, so why not? Should we use the width and height image attributes, or shouldn't we?
Should we use, sorry?
The width and height image attributes.
Sure, you should. Actually, what I was trying to say here, if you are using the EMG tag, if it's a responsive image, it depends, but it is important. Yeah, that's a tricky question. It depends. If it's a default image, we always should try to use it, because as I was saying here, the browser needs this information for rendering for giving to the image a final space. So yeah, the attribute of the EMG, yeah, that's a tricky question. If it's a default image, if it's a normal image, yes. If it's a responsive image, I wouldn't say so, because you are kind of limiting the responsive behavior itself. So yeah. All
right. Difficult question for me to understand, but I'll just fire it at you, and so maybe you can interpret it. Did you use pre-processing to add images as a CSS property? For example, background image, instead of using the IMG or picture tag? And yes, why didn't you?
I've done that, and I cried almost cried because of that. So yeah, you have several options. The main problem there is that you actually, if you use the image as a background, you just can count on the CSS properties, and the background tag itself, you can say to it, you can actually define several backgrounds. And for each background, define a different behavior, for example, a different color or a different background color or something like that. But you have the limitations to the images. So for example, you don't have density there. You don't have this property there. So you kind of define these backgrounds on each CSS breakpoint. So you define, for example, from the tablet one, you are going to use this image, and from the desktop, you are going to use this image on the background. But you are super limited on the background. If you are pre-processing and automating everything, you have a really hard time doing that. I don't know if it answers more or less.
All right. 2 more. This is also a tough one. Do we have to avoid to make the browser resize pictures that are not displayed at 100%? Do you get the question?
Yeah.
Oh,
I think, yeah. So resize to smaller, it depends. I guess it's a normal behavior if you are not scaling a lot. But if you are upscaling, it depends on the image and the thing that you're upscaling. If you are upscaling something that is blur, it's okay. But if you are upscaling something that actually needs good resolution, it's something that the designer maybe kills you or something like that. It depends. It depends on the situation. But it normally wouldn't be a good thing to upscale things. And if you have to downscale, there's a limit. Then you have to pick another picture, another image, sorry.
All right, a simple one to conclude. Should we give the editors the crop image module or the focal point module in Drupal? Maybe you already answered that, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I mean, it depends on the situation that you have and the budget that you have. So if you have a super large budget, you can spend days just improving the options that you give to the user. But if you give too many options to the final user, it's not something necessarily good. Because imagine that is an editor that is uploading images for, I don't know, for a news website. And every time that he or she has to upload an image, he has to crop all of the images one per one, and you have, I don't know, 4 breakpoints, and per image he has or she has to do that. That's a lot of work. So giving too much options, maybe it's not always good, and also it's a lot more expensive. So by default, we always, for example, at Imra, we always install focal point. That's a default, that's a minimum basis. And then if you need something special or more control, then go for the crop one.
All right, that was the last question. Thank you very much, Cristina. Give her an applause.